Okay, let's talk about other nice bits of gear to purchase if you have the money. This entire section is really for those who know they're going to be serious about photography and want their shooting experience to be just that little bit better. Some of these things can be completely overkill for the beginning stages of photography, and other things can be pretty cheap and have really good benefits and really good return for your investment. So, I'll be sure to talk about which items I feel are crucial and which items aren't. We've already covered quite a bit about tripods when we talked specifically about them in the landscape genre. But in this section, it's perhaps worth repeating the point again, if only briefly, because I do feel like every photographer needs to own at least one tripod, even if it's a small travel sized one, because at some point you will need it. And whether that's for dedicated tripod shots like in landscape photography, or that's whether you want to take self portraits, or maybe even want to set up your camera as a live streaming camera for Zoom calls or what have you. Again, there are tripods of all shapes and sizes and materials for all budgets. And if you've forgotten what we've talked about already when it comes to tripods, then please go back to the landscape genre class and rewatch that part. Now, the same thing goes for lights, specifically studio lights and all of the different kinds of light sources and light modifiers you can buy. There are so many. Go back and watch the portrait genre class and get a really good idea of what to buy there and see if you have any requirements in that space. However, on the topic of lights just in general, I did want to point out that there are other types of non-studio lights that can come really handy as well. These portable battery powered USB-C LED lights can come in super clutch sometimes. There are a ton of different styles of these lights at all sorts of different price points, again, and all sorts of different power and color options too. But these little things are great for all sorts of situations. Like maybe you just need a little pop of fill light on a natural light outdoor portrait shoot. Or maybe you're doing astrophotography and you need something to quickly light up the scene while you do a long exposure. Or maybe it's just dark and you're just hiking at night and you need something to light the way that's really powerful. You know, they're super handy to just throw in your bag and forget about. And when you need them, they're there. Search for compact photography LED light on Amazon or something like that, and you'll get a bunch of cheaper versions from companies like SmallRig or Ulanzi or Neewer. Or if you want the more expensive stuff, then look for brands like Aperture or Rotolite or even LumeCube. While you're at it, just to throw it in, having a really good headlamp really helps too if you're a landscape photographer. If you're camping or something, it's always really handy to have a headlamp so that you can see around camp. But also, if you're hiking before sunrise or after sunset, then it's a really great little device so that you can see what you're doing. Camera bags, specifically camera backpacks, are something that for me is a journey that doesn't seem to end. I am absolutely obsessed with finding the best camera backpack for all sorts of travels and journeys. You know, I've literally been through dozens of them in my lifetime, trying different ones, putting them through cities, through hikes, through harsh conditions, sand, beaches, storms, whatever life throws at me. With bags, I feel like many photographers go through the same journey as well. So good luck. But there are a few things that you probably want to be on the lookout for when you're assessing what the perfect camera backpack could be for you. And the first consideration is space. How much space do you actually need? How much gear do you have? A 20-liter bag might be able to fit two bodies and two lenses and perhaps some of the prime lenses or something like that, where a 30-liter bag might be able to fit that plus a few extra lenses. But then what about the other things that you might want to bring on? You know, tripod carrier, water bottle. If you've got a drone, that takes up a lot of space as well. And then secondly is comfort. Camera bags get really heavy really quickly. Seriously, when you start putting a lot of gear in there, it'll put your back to the test. And if you want a comfortable bag, the first thing to look for is quality backpack straps and how padded they are. You know, from there, things like a padded back is really important as well. And then if you intend to take this bag hiking or on longer trips, then a waist belt is almost a must in my opinion, closely followed by a chest strap as well. Trust me, all of these little things add up to your carrying experience when you're out there in the world doing, you know, all of the different activities, whether it's in the urban environment or the natural environment. Of course, if you're only in the city and you're going from studio to studio, then perhaps even something like a messenger bag or a side bag will work better for you. Totally up to your preference. From there, you have the nice to haves. Things like quick access to your camera gear, laptop sleeves, tablet compartments. Over time, you'll learn to know whether you like a bag that opens up from the back like a turtle, or from the front, or even from the sides. And many photographers out there put their bags down when they reach a location and they get their cameras out of their bags while the bag is still on the ground. Now, if that sounds like you, then a bag that opens up from the back would be a great option, which also makes sure that it protects you from thieves and pickpockets as well. And on that topic, there are some camera bags that absolutely just scream camera bag visually, right? If you're going to be using this bag to travel with, perhaps a bag that's like a little bit less conspicuous might be better, depending on where you're traveling to, of course. Some of the things to look out for are the little pockets for the tons of miscellaneous things you end up with and you end up bringing as a photographer. Little pockets for things like SD cards, batteries, filters, sunglasses, straps, cables, hard drives, and all that kind of stuff can really go a long way. For me personally, I love everything by a company called Peak Design. I've had this bag, the Everyday Backpack, in a 20 liter ever since it came out. And actually, this is my third version of this bag because I use it so much and I love it so much. I personally love it because I can fit 2 bodies, 2 lenses, a drone, a controller, batteries, and still have a laptop sleeve and pockets for little things as well. But I especially love it because it doesn't look like a camera bag at all. And it only really opens up the camera compartment from the sides. It's a side access bag because I never actually put my bag on the ground ever. I'm always on the go, and I like to be able to take my camera out and store it back while I'm standing up. So swinging it around to the side for me is the best solution for me. However, when there's times where I need to absolutely haul a lot of gear, I use the Peak Design Travel Backpack, which is a turtle shell design that I actually do have to put down to take out my camera if I want to do that. Although I'm really only ever using this bag to haul a lot of gear from one place to another most of the time on those longer travel trips that I do. And this is only for backpacks. When it comes to hauling your gear, there are also things like slings and satchels and roller bags and totes. And there's harder stuff like Pelican hard cases as well. And I've tried them all. And I always go back to the classic backpack. But, I also have a few Pelican hard cases too. And this is one of them. There's so many different options out there for camera bags. Some reputable brands include Peak Design, Lowepro, Manfrotto, Vanguard, F-Stop, Think Tank, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch. But ultimately, there's so many, and the quality has really risen quite a lot, especially since I first started photography. So much so that you really can't go wrong with most of the options out there. All right, so you've got a camera. Now, how do you secure it to yourself? Just in case you drop it or something. There are so many accessories to make sure that your important items are secured to you in case you drop it, or in case someone tries to do a snatch and run or something like that. Categorically, there are straps that will either rest from your neck, so neck straps, and then there are cross body straps that go from your shoulder down to your opposite waist. There are also wrist straps or cuffs that only attach to your wrist. So you only carry your camera in your hand and the wrist strap acts as a kind of tether. And then there are hand grips, and then there are straps that come off the camera that secure your hand to the camera, a whole bunch of different solutions. And again, there are many brands and products and price ranges to suit everyone for every budget. And they're all made out of different materials like leather or webbing or paracord and so much more. Personally, I like to stick with the brands that have specific mounting systems that surround their gear. So for me, again, I use the Peak Design stuff. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I always just come back to their gear time and time again, even after having gone and bought a bunch of other different straps from different companies and explored other different options as well. And I particularly love the Peak Design stuff because their mounting system is so great. It's called the Anchor system, and it's these little anchors that they use to attach to all of your straps and wrist straps and all that kind of stuff that they have. For me, I heavily use a product called the Leash, which is an adjustable strap that I usually wear crossbody, but if I'm not doing that, then I'll commonly use the Cuff wrist strap too. I have Peak Design anchors on all of my cameras so I can swap and change between everything on the fly, and it's a really neat and convenient system. But of course, there's nothing wrong with just using the camera strap that came with your camera. You know, most cameras come with straps that say the model name and the brand on them, and they're totally fine too. Don't feel like you need to buy something extra, but in case you do, there are a lot of options for you. Next up are SD cards and readers. And this is a kind of whole other genre in and of itself, and it can get kind of technical and be a little bit confusing. All right, so SD cards all have different speeds that they're rated for, and they all have different sizes. In most cases, how much capacity an SD card has is totally up to you and your preference and the amount of money you want to spend on it or how much you think you'll use. But obviously, all things being equal, the more capacity it has, the more it's going to cost. With SD cards typically going up to 1 terabyte these days, which is absolutely insane. 64 gigs and 128 gigs are perhaps the more common sizes, I would say. But where it starts to actually get a little bit confusing is that each SD card is rated for a specific transfer speed. And depending on how fast your camera is, some cameras require faster SD card speeds because they need to write that information to the card really, really fast with all the photos that you might be taking in a burst, for example. If you have a camera that can shoot 10 shots per second versus one that can shoot 20 shots per second, if they're both shooting the same amount of megapixels, obviously the 20 shot camera is going to produce more shots and more data, which means that it's going to need faster speeds to finish writing that data to that SD card. So you'll need to check what recommended SD card speeds your camera manufacturer recommends and get the appropriate card. SD cards can be rated in speed classes, UHS speed classes, and video speed classes. And all of them indicate the minimum write speed. And it's a dumb, old, fragmented system that's kind of confusing. So speed classes range from 2 to 10, 10 being the highest. And then from there it goes to UHS speed classes, which go from 1 to 3. And then video speed classes, which go from V6 to V90. For photography, the SD card speed matters a lot less than it does for video. So in most cases, getting a speed class 10 or a UHS 1 or a V10 class and above will be more than fine for most applications unless you find yourself bursting a lot. So I would encourage you to observe your own shooting habits first and see whether or not this is for you and whether you are constantly having to wait for your camera to buffer in between shots. Of course, in the future, if you're getting the highest end cameras and you have an insane amount of megapixels and really high end features, then you would want faster cards to go along with that, and you would probably have the money for that anyway. And you may go into different formats like something called CF Express, which is a fairly common format for Canon cameras and high-end Sony cameras. But again, check your camera manufacturers for the different card types and speeds for the optimal performance. And as a little side note, I personally store all of my cards in this little Pelican SD card case that looks like this, and it's neat. It's waterproof, crash resistant, and built like a tank. Oftentimes, if you lose or damage your camera, the most important things are actually the memories and the photos you've taken on those SD cards rather than the actual gear itself, because the gear can be replaced, but photos can't. For me, I put a very, very high price on making sure that all of my SD cards are always safe and secure, especially when shooting on commercial gigs where I shoot to 2 cards at the same time, just so that I can have backups of absolutely everything just in case. You never know, right? You never know when things are going to go wrong or if even SD cards will corrupt. Better be safe than sorry. From there, you probably want to think about how to read the data from those cards as well. And traditionally, we use dedicated SD card readers. So we take the SD cards out of the camera and plug it in. And SD card readers come in a single USB interface form, or maybe they can come via USB hubs, or maybe your computer might have them built in. However, nowadays, many of the newer cameras just have USB-C built right into the camera. So you can just plug your camera directly into the computer, even without having to take out the SD card. And in many cases, doing it this way will actually result in faster transfer times too, depending on, the camera and the connection. But this is just something to consider if you have a capable camera and you don't want to spend extra money on a card reader or anything like that. Keeping your gear clean is pretty important as well. And there are a bunch of different cleaning tools that I feel are indispensable when it comes to camera equipment. And I'll give you a quick rundown of those now. The first one is a blower. This specific one is called the rocket blower, and it is a classic that you'll see in absolutely every camera shop out there. But all blowers are pretty much the same. The idea is that when you squeeze it and air comes out, it's dust-free air. And you use it on the front of your lenses and even on your sensors sometimes so that you don't have to touch them, but you can still get them clean at the same time. With lenses, you typically want to not touch the front or the back element at all if it can be avoided, although sometimes you do have to clean it properly. But the first line of defense is always a blower. And with sensors, pretty much just never touch it ever. While the sensor does have a piece of glass on the front of it, it is very sensitive and it catches fingerprints like crazy. And when you change lenses often, you will inevitably end up with little dust or little specks that appear on the sensor. But again, using a blower is your first line of defense to clean it by just simply blowing it off. All right, the next thing is a trusty microfiber cloth and a lens spray. The spray is important to mention, but you have to be careful with what spray you use. It has to be specifically for optical applications and not contain any alcohol. Bonus points if the spray has like anti-static or anti-fog coating as well. But basically, you want to use a spray to clean the front of your lenses occasionally so that you don't have to press as hard or work as hard when it comes to using a microfiber cloth. Be pretty frugal with it. Just 1 or 2 sprays on the lens itself or on the cloth will do. And a single 30 ml bottle will last me an entire year or more, especially if you have a blower. So again, use it frugally, use it sparingly. And remember, the less contact you have with the elements of the lens, the better. You don't want to scratch it. Okay, so what if somehow, and I have no idea how you would even do this, but what if somehow you accidentally got a big thumbprint or something or smudge on your sensor? Well, then I would highly recommend that you send it in for cleaning. Almost any camera store will do this for you at a price, and it's almost always worth having a professional do it. If you do want to do it yourself, there are sensor cleaning kits where they have swabs the size of sensors so that you only need to do 1 or 2 passes and hopefully it gets clean that way. But honestly, these things are a little bit scary. You'll have to watch a lot of YouTube tutorials before you give it a go. But honestly, for me in my career, I've only ever done this once, and it was only because I was curious. It wasn't even because I had a smudge on the sensor or anything like that. But otherwise, I've gotten my sensor cleaned a couple of times in my life, and all my other cameras, I've just used a blower. So really, this kind of cleaning is pretty edge case, and you won't have to do it very often. Alrighty, then the last thing about cleaning here is the actual exterior of your camera and lenses themselves, because sometimes they can get dirty with, hand grease and oil and city grime. And if you've been out in nature, then maybe dirt and sand and anything else you might come across. And I'm personally a little bit of a clean freak, and I'll clean all of my camera bodies and my camera lenses almost every other time that I'll go out. So for the exterior, you can use wipes or even just a microfiber cloth with some lens spray on it. And again, nothing with alcohol on it. And then for the fine areas, you can get a little brush like this one to get in those teeny tiny crevices where your fingers are too big. Oh, and actually one thing I did want to mention here, which is perhaps a little bit specific, is that if you're using tripods in the ocean, say you're doing seascapes or something like that, and you get seawater on it, make sure to wash it off with fresh water as soon as you can whenever you get back, because seawater will quickly corrode all of the little metal screws and joins and stuff like that. So just something to be aware of. You don't want that expensive tripod to start rusting. Alrighty, last 2 here, and the last 2 are 2 other methods of capturing, actually. So the first one is drones, and drones have taken off in the last half decade, both literally and figuratively. And they're absolutely amazing tools for getting some perspectives that you just don't get from the ground. Now, I would actually consider drones kind of advanced and a little bit out of scope for a beginner's course due to the complexities around how to fly well, how to fly in certain conditions, and all that domain knowledge around that, as well as all of the different rules and regulations in every single country. It's literally an entire mini course in itself. one that I might actually make one day. However, the tech has been getting better and better as the years go by, and the experience of flying them is getting easier and easier to learn. And photographers have been adding the entry level drones to their kit earlier and earlier on in their journeys. And I think that's a fantastic thing. It's great to see. And with drones and purchase decisions, it's easy. Just go with DJI and then get an entry level one from the Mavic series. Honestly, done and dusted. Now, the reasoning for that is that DJI has the hold on the drone market, and due to the way regulations for aviation work around the world, they've also got the most experience in navigating users through all of those different rules. Because drone rules are different in every country, and a lot of the other smaller drone manufacturers just don't have the tech or the development to make features that abide by those rules to keep you safe and keep you legal. So, just take the easy route. DJI has done a lot of that for you, but make sure to look up the relevant drone laws in your country as well. Now, when it comes to which drone to select and to choose from, well, I don't want to date this course too much, but honestly, DJI's entry-level stuff, like the Mavic Mini series, is just so good that it's going to be overkill for most people in most situations. But if you've never flown before, know that there is a very huge learning curve to flying well, and you will want to take the learning slow and ease into it, because the reality is, for most people, you're gonna crash. Most people do. Better to crash with a cheaper drone than an expensive one. So start with an entry level one, and then if you love it and you get addicted to it, then work your way up to the more pro line of drones. Now, aside from trying to scare you out of buying one, if you are considering one, then the skills that you learn on the ground here in this course in terms of composition and craft will actually definitely carry over to flying a camera in the air, because they're all cameras at the end of the day, right? But drones are most certainly a luxury, and definitely not a recommended place to start with, but definitely good to look at when you've mastered the basics of photography. Okay, and finally, action cams. So action cams in terms of photography are actually very edge case, I would say, but they can grant some really cool results depending on what you're shooting. So most people buy action cams for video rather than photography, but they can also serve as amazing second or third angles for time-lapse photography. Or if you're in a confined space and you just want a really super wide shot, if you just want something that's like really small and really convenient to bring around with you, then an action cam is justifiable in that instance. But I couldn't personally justify owning one just for the photography features alone, so I own them for video features, but it's just something to bring up if you want to experiment with them and you have that cash to spend. Alrighty, shopping list time. Today's assignment is to take stock of all of the topics that I talked about, and for whatever you found interesting, do some research in the category of what I was talking about, and then make a purchase list for yourself. Especially when you get into things like tripods and backpacks and accessories like straps and what have you. Those things really make the experience of getting out there and shooting a whole lot nicer. And I really recommend you find something that works for you sooner rather than later. Just be warned that if you're anything like me, researching this stuff is just a massive rabbit hole that I personally get stuck in for ages, watching review videos and comparisons and doing a lot of umming and ahhing and thinking about it, but I love it, so, it is what it is. But if you can't afford to buy anything new right now, then that's totally fine as well. Make the list and do the research, and then keep an eye on it for when things go on sale or when you're in a better financial position. There's no rush on this kind of stuff. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.